Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the EFPC webinar for today. My name is Robin Chowolos. I'm the Junior Coordinator of the European Forum for Primary Care. For those of you who are not familiar with the EFPC, the EFPC was established in 2005 to strengthen primary care across Europe. Through conferences, publications, and advocacy, we bring together professionals, whether it be policymakers, researchers, or healthcare professionals itself, as well as organizations committed to advancing people-centered, accessible, and high-quality primary care. So our webinar for today is going to be presented by Irene Tafrivena. She's a registered nurse and a professor of intellectual disability and palliative care at Kingston University in London. She has extensive clinical experience in both intellectual disability and palliative care services in the UK. And since 2001, she has led an award-winning program of research around intellectual disability, dying, death, and bereavement. Her team includes several researchers with an intellectual disability. So I'd like to welcome Irena. We're very excited for your presentation today, and thank you for being here. And to all of those in the audience, if you have any questions, please keep them for the end. Otherwise, you are welcome to put them in the chat, and we will have 10-15 minutes at the end to discuss these questions. So I'd like to hand over to you. Let me stop sharing my screen, Irena. There we go.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, and well, thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got about 45 minutes or so, I'm told I'm allowed to speak to you, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion after that. But just before I share my screen, yeah, just a little bit of an introduction for me. My name is Irena. I'm a nurse by background, as Robin said. I come from the Netherlands originally. I don't know whether there's anybody from the Netherlands here, but if you are, hello, nice to see you. But I've lived in the UK, in England, in London actually, for 40 years or so all my adult life. So I worked in learning disability services. I lived and worked together with people with what we call learning disability in the UK. It's intellectual disability. These terms here are interchangeable. So I was in a community called L'Arche, where we shared our lives together for about 8 years. I worked in a hospice for 8 years as a nurse, and then for the past 25 years or so, I've been university-based, as Robin said, leading a whole program of research. So let me see if I can get the screen. And we did practice this, Robin. So let me know if this looks okay. If you can see this. I'm just going to see if I can make this bigger. And there's always a problem with my maps. Here we go. Hopefully this will work. Right, can you see it big now? Can let's check that, Robin?
Yep, that's all
okay,
perfect.
Good. We're all good to go. Great, excellent. So this is we at Kingston University, this is my research team. And as you said, we have, for quite a long time, actually, in all these years, it was just me and a computer trying to get funding for this kind of research. But it's really been sort of growing, and this is my current team. And actually, there's a few people missing here, but we have 4 people with an intellectual disability as employees of, employed researchers at the university. That's quite unique, I think, and important for us, because I want to really include the perspectives and the voices of people themselves in our research. I think that's really crucial. So this is a usual working day for us. We are quite a sort of eclectic, diverse group. We've just renamed ourselves, actually. We're now called the KIND Research Group. It stands for Kingston University Intellectual Disability Research. We thought we'd move away from the term learning disability, because that is really only used in England. And in the UK and outside internationally, intellectual disabilities is much better understood. So what I'm going to do today is I am going to talk you just through, I don't know what your background and what your jobs are. I know that you're all in primary care. I'm sure you all are familiar and work with people with intellectual disabilities at times. So a lot of this will not be new to you, but I think it's always useful to remind ourselves of the background, the statistics, the definition. Why does this topic matter? Then I'll talk you through some of the challenges, particularly when people come to the end of life. What are the issues that people then face? And then I spend a sort of most of this presentation on a recent project that we've completed, which was the development of an end-of-life care planning toolkit and talking about death and dying with people with intellectual disabilities, as well as just mention at the very end some of our current projects. So I hope that's what you thought you were coming to. So let's just think about the definition of intellectual disability then. So there are 3 aspects to this, and all of these have to be present for people to fall within the definition. So impaired cognitive functioning, that's an IQ of below 70. I mean, that's not a totally useful thing to know, because you often don't know people's IQ, but it is an important part of it. So we're not talking about people, autistic people, for example, who have normal or above normal intelligence. Limitation of learning and adaptive behavior. So people have sort of difficulties or challenges or limitations in one or more areas to do with managing independently, being able to attend mainstream schools, or being able to cope with independent living, for example, or communication. And crucially, this is a lifelong condition that starts before the age of 18. And that makes it quite different from people, for example, who acquire brain injuries later in life, or people with dementia, who may well have similar challenges, at the moment. But there is quite a crucial difference, particularly, I think, in the fact that these people with an intellectual disability are very experienced in having limitations, and so are their families and the people who support them. They have lifelong experience of being carers, and really are, that's really often really defined their lives. So in terms of numbers, it's difficult to know, because everybody, all countries and studies count people slightly differently. But depending on how you define this population, they usually say about 2%. So that means that out of, if you have 50 patients on your caseload, then if access was equal, about one of them would have an intellectual disability. But it's a hidden population. I mean, one study in England found that about 3/4 of people with intellectual disabilities are not known to health and social care services, and that means that when they come to your service, whether it's primary care, whatever health service you are part of, or whether it's palliative care, they might not know they have an intellectual disability, and neither does anybody else. And so that it's a little bit hidden. And I think that is quite an at-risk group of people from whom the reason why they might struggle with things are not so clear and not known. I'm just going to talk you through the different, the different degrees of intellectual disabilities. And I think that is useful to think about in terms of what different challenges they may have if they reach a stage in life where they're getting more frail or ill, or may need end-of-life support. So the largest group of people with intellectual disabilities, about 85% of all this people it's quite mild, and that is often linked to social deprivation. So you'll find higher proportions of that within sort of low-income communities. And these are probably the most likely to be the hidden population as well. But these people will maybe have some difficulty at school. Most people can do some reading or some basic maths, and may well have, sometimes whole families have intellectual disabilities, may well cope very well and independently in society. Possibly until something goes wrong, when people then begin to have health problems, that might be the time when actually they come up against barriers and not quite manage to find the support or to get the support that they need. So this group of people, for example, may well struggle to understand written instructions, or you might have made an appointment and they don't turn up. I remember when I was working in the hospice, for example, there was somebody who was never there when we'd arranged to go and visit them at home. My colleagues at times said, well, maybe they clearly don't need us because they're not there. Whereas I thought it was actually more of a diary. That woman just didn't do diaries. She she didn't manage to think about timing and appointments, or grasp why you have certain procedures, or understand, that 3 times a day means, once with your breakfast and once with your lunch and once in the evening. So I think these people are often seen as the sort of difficult patients. You might not know they have an intellectual disability. I'm sure, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was working in the hospice as a nurse, that there were patients with whom you explain things and then you think, I think I better start again here. Always have in the back of your mind then, actually, is this because this person has an intellectual disability? Is that the reason why they're not quite managing, or why their behaviour might be different or challenging to you, to others, or to the ward, or to the group, to the team? People with moderate intellectual disabilities also, have some delays in childhood, may have some basic reading and writing skills, mostly have some independent skills, will need some support. These are people who you can probably manage to communicate with in words, if you keep it simple. But people with severe and particularly profound intellectual disabilities, you will have no problem knowing about this, because they will not be able to access your service without support. They will have somebody with them. They probably can't read or write. They may have some verbal skills, but may well not understand what you're saying to them. So they are people who as you really need to work with families and supporters there. And people with profound intellectual disabilities often have very unique ways of communicating that is very difficult to understand for people who don't know them well, and that includes you probably. So you really need to work again together with families and with supporters. They often have very complex, multiple additional health needs as well. So that's just an overview. And for that group, clearly there are obvious challenges here for if somebody has end-of-life care needs related to communication, of pain, of other symptoms. Often, many people sort of find it difficult to cope with changes or changes in circumstances. Having said that, I also find that people with profound disabilities are quite experienced in being supported and being cared for. So it might be less difficult and challenging for them, for example, to need to have higher support needs because they're more ill, or to be cared for by nurses, for example. What I hear from families and carers is the struggles that families have in making healthcare professionals understand the value of the people's life and their quality of life, and that therefore end-of-life decisions need to be made in the light of what is a normal good quality of life for this person, not what we assume is a good quality of life. So we hear that families often have to fight for life-saving treatment, for example, for this group of people. And that takes us to sort of health inequities and health inequalities. These figures may well be familiar to you, that people with intellectual disabilities in England, this is being monitored in England through an annual mortality review of the deaths of people with intellectual disabilities. And that consistently have found over the last 15 years or so that people die on average about 20 years earlier than people without a learning disability. And that a larger proportion of those deaths are avoidable. What we mean by avoidable is that they are either, people shouldn't have died because the illness should have been picked up. So, for example, screening or, monitoring annual health checks, that kind of thing. Or it could have been treated and it wasn't treated. So, and we found that the avoidable deaths for this group, the general population also has a large proportion of avoidable deaths, but they tend to be more related to lifestyle factors like smoking or or obesity, unhealthy living patterns. Whereas for people with learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, their avoidable deaths are more likely to be due to failures or omissions of the healthcare system, of the care, not getting the right care and support. So let's just think then about a little bit more about some of these challenges that people face when they come to the end of their lives. And I'm going to just focus on 4 areas. I'm sure the list is probably a lot longer, but challenges related to these different things. On multimorbidity, how do you recognize that somebody is coming to the end of life? Issues around communication, and then issues around reasonable adjustments. So multimorbidity, our reviews have found that on average, the number of long-term health conditions with people with an intellectual disability at the point of their death is 11. That is quite a lot of things. So things like, heart problems, epilepsy, visual sensory impairments, etc. And that clearly makes sort of assessment and knowing what is what more difficult for this population. And they may well die of a combination of these things. They may well be more likely to die of, of things that maybe you look at one thing and they'll die of something else, for example. And these also tend to have an earlier onset, not always, but there is a higher chance of people. Dementia, for example, there's early onset dementia, particularly in people with Down syndrome. But also, it may well be that you don't think about something, a sort of what you might see as an old person's issue in somebody who's younger, but keep that in mind. So you look out for issues, health issues that you would usually associate with an older population for this group of people. And that has also, relates to how do you then recognize that somebody has an end-of-life care need? Because people, end-of-life care need, we found, is people are most likely to be referred to palliative care services or to have their deaths anticipated and therefore possibly planned for a little bit more carefully if they have cancer or dementia. Because these are the conditions that that have a fairly predictable trajectory, and if somebody's diagnosed with one of those conditions, then usually the staff and both healthcare and social care staff would realise that some sort of planning or extra support is needed. But many people with an intellectual disability don't die of those things, but they die of of frailty or as I say, conditions happening at a younger age. So I suppose the thing to look out for are things like, has this person been in hospital 6 times this year with a chest infection already? So just monitor their general health. In the UK, we have a system of annual health checks where people with an intellectual disability are entitled to an annual health check by their GP, their general practitioner, and GPs get paid for this extra. So there is a system for this. That would be presumably the time to really review whether this person, is at that baseline health or whether something is changing. And with assessment really and seeing what is happening with people, that is the key issue to look at, because somebody might present so differently generally. The thing to look at with the person and with their carers, with their family is there a change? Is there something, are they back at baseline, or is their mobility actually generally worse? They're not taking as much initiative as they did a while ago, this kind of thing. There aren't very many tools or things like that to help you with this. If you speak Dutch, then you might want to have a look at the Palli, which is an instrument, a tool that was developed a couple of years ago for use by GPs, by doctors, by healthcare staff, and by support staff to ask all these questions. It's to do with, is this person the same as they were 3 years ago in a whole range of areas. In my current study, which I'll just mention briefly at the end, we are just now starting a program of work where we specifically look at all the different instruments and tools that are out there. I say all, there aren't very many, but to see, what are there ways in which we can really help staff and carers in a whole range of settings to spot earlier that somebody needs end-of-life support. Because if you don't spot that, then things have a chance to become emergencies, emergency admissions or inappropriate admissions, people going to hospital when they really needn't or shouldn't go to hospital, for example. So it's a difficult issue and want to keep an eye on. Communication, not surprisingly, when I talk to staff in any setting, actually is the issue that always comes up, is how can I make myself understood? How can I help this person to understand what is happening? And how can I find out what their problems are? How can they assess their issues and their symptoms? Again, I could talk about it at length, but again, really the main thing that I think is really important and that helps is to work with families and carers and with the person themselves to see if things have changed. People may well not present their pain, for example, in a way that we would usually think is normal. People may not say they're in pain because they may not have the words, but they also may not express them in their behavior in the same way. They may well laugh, when they're in pain. That may be their normal thing, that if they're in pain, they're laughing. So be careful not to think, if you don't know somebody, oh, he's laughing, he should be fine. I would really want to know from the carers whether that is normal, because they usually know. They usually tell you, something's not quite right with Johnny. And you say, well, how do you know that? And they'll say, oh, well, I just know because I know them. In this sort of these issues, the best tool and the most helpful approach that I found is the DISDAT. I think it now stands for disability. I can't remember. They've changed it. It used to be disability distress assessment tool. I can't quite remember what it stands for nowadays. But have a look at their website, because that tool is helping to carers to really sort of articulate the changes that they see. And crucially, it talks about, I think what is good about this is that if somebody really doesn't speak, and I think this is also relevant for other patients who don't have an intellectual disability, but they don't speak because of dementia or because they're too ill, or they might even be unconscious. Then if somebody's in distress, then you don't really know for sure whether it's pain or whether it's something else, whether it's nausea or whether they're just distressed about something completely different. So a pain assessment tool might not be that suitable for this person. What you need is a distress assessment tool, and then you need to make an educated guess about what the cause of the distress might be. Again, involve carers. I keep saying this, it's a little bit of a mantra, but it really is important. And then finally, the issue of flagging is reasonable adjustments. This is obvious in this picture that it's totally reasonable that this person who is in a wheelchair needs a ramp to go up, that you don't expect somebody to go up the stairs. For people with an intellectual disability, the reasonable adjustments they will need to access your service may be very individualized. It may be things like, needing more time, or needing easier language or pictures, but it may also be that they need, a certain item with them, or certain music, or their carer, or they need to be seen in the car park because they don't like coming into the office, into the building. So be creative about this, and the best way to find out what reasonable adjustment somebody needs is to ask them, and to ask their families, what would make it easier for this person to cope with your service or to access your service or whatever it is that you're offering. Okay, that was the overview. I'm now going to move on to my current projects, or not current project, even though we're still sort of working with the dissemination of this. The Victoria Stewart project was between 2022 and 2024. And it was named after these two people, Victoria, who had profound learning intellectual disabilities, and Stuart, who was able to speak and talk, both of whom were extremely well supported at the end of life in a way that they would want and that they had, that they would ask for. If they could, in fact, Stuart could ask, but Victoria's family was and supporters were very involved with that. And it was funded by a UK major research funder in collaboration with all these different organisations. The project came about because one of the questions I was asked most often, really, when I started doing this work and became a professor in this field, was, do you have an easy read end of life care plan that we could use? If any of you work in palliative care or work a lot with people who are at the end of life, then you will know that end of life care planning or advanced care planning there's lots of terminology there, is a thing, right? Is important. We want to involve people in the choices. There are forms and plans about this, and this is just an example of a standard and advanced care planning that for people without an intellectual disability. And so that was the question. And there were a number of those easy read turned into easy read, which means simple language, pictures, etc. And these are some examples of what was out there. But I was just never convinced that this was the best way to help people make decisions and choices. They weren't really tested or tried. So I wanted to do a study, and I worked together with with learning intellectual disability service providers to get to see what would work best. And these are two of my colleagues, both of whom have an intellectual disability. And this is what Leon, he really articulated the problem really well.
How can we prepare for something we don't know when or how it's going to happen? And that's not easy to handle, let alone plan.
And that is so absolutely right. And I think that's particularly hard for people with an intellectual disability who may struggle more with abstract thinking or thinking about the future and what happens next. So we wanted to know, does this work? If not, is there a better way? And then we really wanted to do this together. So there was a huge group of people involved. I'm just going to show you 7 minutes, it's about 7 minutes long, of our final report video. That tells you what we did in the study, and then I'll pick up a little bit of the issues that I find particularly pertinent in the work that we've done.
Hello, I'm Richard.
I'm Leon.
I'm Amanda, and we work at Kingston University.
We helped to make this. In this video, we will tell you
What's in the toolkit?
we made it.
And how we made it.
What's in the toolkit?
The toolkit is to help you think about the end of your life and to help you ahead for when you're going to die.
The toolkit has lots of resources like pictures and cards to help you think and talk about it.
Or you can use art.
Or talking mats.
If you are staff, there are 3 guides to help you. They show you how to help us to be involved in making choices.
Most of the toolkit is free to download.
Why did we make the toolkit?
People with a learning disability aren't always involved in planning their end-of-life care.
It's important that we all make our own decisions because it's about the end of our life. No one knows what our decision is that we want to make, only us. It's not fair that someone else comes along and takes it away from us.
But staff don't always know what to do to help us make decisions about our end of life.
That's why we need to make a new toolkit.
How did we make the toolkit?
First we got the money.
We're going to need more than this to do a research project. That's not enough money for research.
We helped to write the grant application.
We got together with teams from 6 organisations to help create this toolkit. We called it the Victoria Stewart Project after 2 people who inspired us and died well.
We did 4 things. First, we tried to find all the things that people had already written and the resources they had already made for end-of-life care planning.
We found quite a few easy read end-of-life care plans, but they hadn't really been tested to see if they could help people to talk and plan.
We listened to more than 100 people in focus groups, including people with learning disabilities, families and staff.
Everybody thought it was a good idea for people to be involved in end-of-life care planning.
But family staff didn't really do it.
They didn't know how, or they would be worried that the person wouldn't understand. Also, it was hard to know what to plan for as things can change.
What families and people with learning disabilities talked most about was planning their funerals.
But it's also important to plan for when you are dying.
Then we did lots of workshops with all these people.
We called it the All Together group. Their job was to look at everything we found and to decide what we put in the toolkit.
We didn't like any of the easy read forms, but we really liked easy and creative ways to help you think and talk, like pictures or art.
We found a gap in the market.
We asked Bixby on Words to make new pictures about funerals.
We also asked an artist to make picture cards that help you think about being ill and to help you plan for your funeral.
We also made guides with lots of videos showing you how you can use everything. They're all on YouTube.
When the toolkit was ready, we gave it to staff to test it out with people they support.
The staff who tried it really liked it.
They gave us some ideas for new pictures, which we did.
We actually did one more thing, and that is to tell the people about the project.
We did social media, webinars, conferences, and we wrote lots of papers about it. We did a big launch at the end of the project.
3, 2, 1.
We are very proud of the toolkit.
toolkit.
You can find everything on our website and our YouTube channel.
Do go to the website and have a look.
We hope you like it too.
Almost 200 people were involved in this project.
Thank you to everyone.
Bye.
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 Hands up, baby.
Thank you to the funders.
Okay, we'll leave it there. But as you can see, it was a very serious project, but probably the most fun we've had for as well. So, but just picking up a few things there, what really struck me was this toolkit was for use within social care services, right? That was where the question came from. So support people who, and in the UK, people with intellectual disabilities are usually supported not by healthcare professionals or trained social workers, but by fairly untrained staff within social care services. And families and people with an intellectual disability themselves and those support staff, usually when we talked about what is end-of-life care planning, they talked about funerals. And as a palliative care nurse by background, a nurse, I think about the end of life. I think about what will happen when I'm ill and dying. And we found that usually those things are combined in end-of-life care planning forms, and we separated them because I think those are quite different things. We also found it very much to do with how people live and how you support people to make choices generally about their lives, as well as the huge cultural taboo of talking about death. But we focused on making resources for planning funeral and for illness planning, as we called it. And that the last one was really tricky because, as I say, it's difficult to know for people to visualize that in advance. And yet we want to make the right choices when probably at a time when people may be too ill, or even if they had capacity before, they may have lost it. So we asked, I suppose, people like yourselves, there's the healthcare staff, people working in primary, secondary care services, what is it that you need to know in order to make the right choice, when somebody suddenly presents with an issue that needs a decision. And that's what we based the When I'm Ill cards on. So these are single topic cards about different issues, and people can think about it together. There's also some ways of recording it. And the key thing there is that this isn't like it was on the end-of-life care planning, advanced care planning forms. This is not a tick box like, yes, I want to go to hospital, or yes, I want to stay at home, because that choice may not be in people's hands, actually. But what you want to do is to make sure that when a choice has to be made, that it's made based on people's, what people really would want. So we use these cards to encourage people to think with each one, what makes me feel safe? What would be good about going to hospital? What would be difficult about that? And how we can make that easier for people. And that's, and write that down and base your decisions on that. And I'm just going to send you 5 minutes of an extract of a video I made where my colleagues talked through these cards one by one, just to give you a flavour of the kind of conversations that people then had with this.
Sometimes it's difficult being in hospital.
The good part of it is I would be in capable hands.
Doctors and nurses might not
they delivered it.
me if I need help.
From watching a hospital jobs like Casualty, Harbour City, there's a term, crashing. I don't know what that means, but it's making me wary of hospitals.
Too busy, noisy. I would just love to be in my own bed where I feel safe.
I'm surrounded by family and friends. Friends of a friend comes to visit.
Being here and with my family and friends around me.
Yes, I live by myself, so that could be quite hard. It could be quite lonely if I stay on my own. In fact, lying in my bed on my own,
What would be hard for me is watching family and friends and watching them see me like this and knowing how hard it would be for them watching me deteriorate. I wouldn't want to put them through it.
Okay, I'll stop there, but it just gives you. I was quite surprised how able people were to think through these options, and that you couldn't take for granted that people want to be at home. People really had were able to think about this. So if this sounds of use, then have a look at this toolkit. It's done. I mean, at the moment, we're working on really sort of still spreading the word. It's been taken up by a charity called Marie Curie in the UK, who is providing free printed copies of some of these resources, of the picture cards, funeral cards, vena cards. They're flying off the shelves, so we're running out a bit. There's a few hundred left, I think, but have a look if you are in the UK only, that they don't send them abroad. Otherwise, you can just freely download all of these from the website, and particularly the guides about how to talk about dying, etc. So that might be useful. There's also a whole range of papers that we've published about this, if you'll enjoy reading those kind of papers. I will, and then just very briefly before I finish, just to point you to what we're doing at the moment. So this is our current study, the DAPL project, where we are really looking much wider, not so much about how to plan for end-of-life care, but how is it actually delivered, and what are the problems, and what makes things work well. So we're working in 4 different areas in the country where we do ethnographic research, so actually going to meet people, spending time with them, but we're also looking at databases. We're doing a literature review just to see what we can learn from the pockets of good practice, of which there are many. There is so much good work going on, but we found it's quite fragmented in the UK, and people doing good things but not necessarily sharing those, or not necessarily doing them in a way that is sustained within organisations. So that is our current study. Again, there is if you're interested to see what we're doing, then follow us on social media, or read our protocol or our website. And actually next week on Thursday, we started a whole new webinar series where me and my colleagues, who you saw in the videos, are presenting, are hosting these webinars, and the one next week is the first one, with the very early findings of the DAPL project, including findings of a very large database analysis, where we looked at the national databases of people with an intellectual disability who are at the end of life, the primary care databases from GPs. So if you want to join us, there's about 700 people signed up so far, so clearly this is something people want to know about. So you can join the gang if you are interested. And then the other project I'm working on is funded by Marie Curie. That is this charity in the UK, and we're looking specifically here at how we can identify the end of life, particularly in people who die of something that is not cancer and not dementia. And within the DAPL project, we're also just starting a whole stream of work there on, as I said, on how to identify an approaching end of life. So watch this space. And that takes me to my 45 minutes that was allowed. I'm just there's a whole load of websites here. Also, we're just beginning to bring all our social media outputs together in what will be the KIND research group now, starting on Facebook. So if you start off on Facebook, then follow us there. And I just want to give the very final words to this group of people, who were the co-production group of people with intellectual disabilities on this toolkit design. And when I asked them what would be your final top tip for staff watching this, or wanting to talk about dying with people with an intellectual disability, this is what they said.
You can do it! You can do it! You can do it! Yes! Yes! Woo! Yes!
Okay, and I think that is me.
Great. Thank you so much, Irina. That was an incredible insight into what you are doing at Kingston University. And personally, I find it very inspiring, the platform that you are giving to somewhat marginalized population, and seeing people like Leon and Amanda and what they contributed to the Victoria and Stuart project, and seeing them present that. It's really, really amazing. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I see there are a few comments in the chat, so we'll just pop there. I think the first comment was about the assessment tool that you said you couldn't remember what it was called now, and I see Nicola said it's the distress and discomfort assessment tool.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then Lee Rose said that she works for the VCSELD care provider. For a VCSE care provider and leading the EOL task and finish group. She would be very interested in the info about the best practice for ACP and these tested formats, and then to integrate them into their work. And that they've ordered a toolkit for their organization to review. So, Lee, I'm not sure if you want to say anything more about that, or Irina, if you want to respond.
Yes, I mean, Lee, I hope that if you are ordering it and using it, we really, at the moment, also really interested in the feedback from that, because there was a pilot project run by Marie Curie to see if, because one of the barriers, you know, you can have a lovely tool and a lovely toolkit, but the toolkit is only as useful as the person using the tools, right? And the things that we've put in, it's not just the resources we've developed, we've also added in links to other things that our groups found helpful. And it may well be that organizations have their own way of doing things. You know, you need to find what works best for you and for your organization. But a huge implementation barrier, or sort of stopping people using it, was that, you know, lots of people do not have access to printers. And our groups really recommended having a physical copy of these resources. And they wanted them in color and on A4 size. People were very clear about that. So that's why Marie Curie sort of thought, let's just see if there is a market for this and if there is a real need. So it's a trial they printed 1,000 copies, and and based on how quickly they fly off the shelves and the feedback that we get, they'll make a decision about whether in the future that's a sustainable thing and they want to keep that on. We actually ran out. We thought 1,000 copies would last about a year, but we did a launch webinar 3 weeks in, and by that time they'd already run out. so there's a reprint. So it just sort of shows. So what we're thinking of now is, you can have these tools, but how do you then actually use them? You know, how do you get them to the people, and in whose hands do these need to end up? And that is still a question that I have. We trialed it within this, and we had a very short period left for trialing, and we wanted to get the support staff who work with people with intellectual disabilities in these services to use this to sort of help them start conversations about end of life. And it was really difficult to find people to do that, even though their organizations were hugely supportive. They were part of our project team. You know, there is still a huge barrier around fear around dying and not knowing how to talk about that. And also, you know, maybe not having the time. You know, these are quite. So it may well be that you, wherever you work, that you're the right person to initiate and to introduce these conversations. We don't know yet. So we're planning at the moment, we're just putting together our next big funding proposal, which is for an implementation study on this, to see how this actually works, and how does it work with people with severe and profound disabilities, for example, who do not have the words and who do not understand pictures. So we had families and support staff of that population within our co-production groups. So we think it works. We think it works by, you know, getting a circle of support or people who know the person well to think together. I think the topics on these picture cards will help people to know what kind of things to think about, you know. But again, all this needs trialing. This is very early days. So any feedback there is a, if you order a toolkit, you'll always send a link to an evaluation form. Please fill it in and send it back to us, because we've sent out about 1,500 copies now, and I think we have about 20 feedback forms back, so we'd quite like some more. That's my little plea.
So Lee said she's just having some technical issues, but they will review the resources and see what works for them, and they're happy to give feedback. She said one of the challenges that they faced already was that there was multiple ACP formats and deciding which one is best, but that anything developed with a live experience is at its core is very much interesting.
And I think I had a sort of a light bulb moment, this aha moment in your project that you think, oh, this is why. I suddenly realized that what the gap in the market, and I think this is probably a gap in the market for everybody, not just people with an intellectual disability, but all these forms that are out there, and these including the easy read ones. Forms are very good if you know what to fill in, if you know what the answer is, and you fill them in, and then you have a document of your answers. What a form doesn't really do, and is not very good at, is having the discussion, is opening up the conversation. And we always say, advanced care planning, end-of-life care planning, it's a process, it's a discussion, it's finding out together. And that, say a form with a little tick box about do you want to be home in hospital does not open up that conversation. So I think if it's starting conversations, opening up, whether it's about funerals or whether it's about illness, I think that is what our toolkit is. Those new resources we put in are trying to do. Where some of the other things, how you then record that and how that fits within your organizational systems, of recording things. Clearly, if somebody has a whole discussion about what they would want, whether they want the nurse to be at home with them or not, or whether they, that is then important information to fill in, to put on any system that enables that to then happen, right? And I don't know what that system is within your organization, but just bear that in mind to sort of think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. Why are you looking at a toolkit? What are you looking for? And if what you're looking for is to help people, is to open up conversations, then that might direct you to the tools that you need. Whereas if you want specific yes, no choices, for example, is this something you'd like or not like? Something like talking maths was very good, which helps people to say yes or no or maybe. It's in a pictorial way. So yeah, have a browse. And again, our guides that we put in the toolkit might also be a good starting point, because they are very much like the videos you watch. We have lots of links to to short videos and interactive ways of learning. But the other thing I was going to say is that we've just done a translation into German, which is now also available online. On our website, on the Victoria Stewart Project website, we had a whole translation process of some of these cards. So does anybody else out there who wants a translation in their own language, get in touch with us, because we've got a whole process for this, which is quite exciting. I see Henk's got his hand up.
Henk?
Yeah, thanks, Irene, for this brilliant presentation, as always. Question. There's no doubt in my mind that your use of the toolkit is brilliant, but when do you start bringing this topic up? Is that at the first annual health check with the GP, or is that when the first sign of deterioration are starting? Any experience in that?
Yeah, that is a good question. That was one of the questions we asked within our study, is when people had very wide-ranging ideas about this. It was interesting that the support staff and the families of people with a severe and profound intellectual disability really understood the need to start this early, because they had experience of people being in hospital, even if it wasn't end of life. But if you don't get this, get down what people really need and want, then wrong choices might be made. I'm going to focus on the end of life, the illness planning, because funeral planning, I think you can do it any time. Some people want to do it, some people never want to do it. That's up to but the illness one, I would say there would be particular triggers where you might want to think about these things. And they are the general triggers for when you start advanced care planning, which is a change in people's circumstances. So if somebody moves to a different setting, for example, that might be the time to, even if it's not, you know, you're not going to die soon, or there's no end of life in place, it may well be that somebody moves to a new care setting, maybe the time to say, you know, we hope you live a really long and healthy and happy life, but, you know, if things change, how, you know, what would you want? Or if there is a change in, you know, in people's health condition, as I said, is, you know, if you think people's health is changing, annual health checks, I think in the UK probably are, I mean, that's, yeah, but exactly how, Hank, I'm also looking to you, really, to the people who use these things to say, well, when is this useful? So we would very welcome you into our implementation plans and to find out more about this. Yeah, because it is an issue, isn't it? It's difficult just to know when to bring this up, and you don't want to sort of scare people and families saying, right, hello, I've got this end of life care planning tool. Shall we sort of sit down and talk about this, right? What message did that give? We did find that the D word, so the death word, was a huge barrier for people thinking and talking about this, talking about families and support staff and social care staff. And so however much I advocate for saying the D word and, you know, not using jargon, I also think it's worth wondering whether you need to use it at all, because most of it is illness planning, right? Most of this is not planning death, it's planning living. And you'll find that in our illness planning cards, there's only 2 out of 36, I think, that had to do with death and dying. Most of these cards had to do with coping with the changes that are associated with the last, you know, stages of life, which might be relevant at any time. So you could perhaps, I don't know, you could see if they're useful for anybody who is ill, actually, or who might face illness, which is all of us at all stages.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know.
Yeah,
So,
because I think, yeah, that is with the word palliative medicine, it's, you know, everyone thinks it's such this ominous thing towards death, but it's actually just how do you make living what you have left great, you know, in the best situation or quality of life that you can have. Kerry Smith has posted 2 questions in the chat. She said, wonders if community learning disabilities teams would be a good group to target to work proactively to support. And then also whether the tools could be adapted to support people who may be accessing mainstream mental health services to support developing plans.
Sorry, is this a question or just a very...
I think it might have just been a statement. I don't know if Kerry wants to elaborate, but there's been a discussion going on in the chats with other people as well. So you're in agreement with her.
Yeah, I suppose what I was thinking, because I work within learning disability services, and whilst the webinars targeted at general practitioners, I suppose, in mainstream mental health services, there are teams of people who could support the people who are on their caseloads who have a learning disability to develop their own plans before they come unwell. And I did wonder, and I certainly have shared that your links with our clinical teams in the community to try and think about that. I also wondered about the 77% of people who aren't really known to services and whether they're accessing some of our mainstream mental health services. And because I work across mainstream mental health services and learning disability services, it is something I'm going to take to the teams within our trust.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. It's yeah, it's hard to reach people, right? Yeah. And as I say, I really don't know who are the people best placed to initiate these kinds of conversations. You know, that's a difficult one. So, yeah, I'll be interested to hear people's real life experiences on that.
Thank you very much once again, and for starting this conversation. And as you can see in the chat, there is the conversation going on and people wanting to look more into this. So thank you very, very much, Irina, and for sharing your knowledge and your experience and your research with us. And we're very grateful.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's a
And if
pleasure.
anyone would like to join, we have 2 more webinars for the year. They're up on the screen. Just follow our website for more details. Thank you everyone for being here.